There we go. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Magic Makers. We've been on a bit of a hiatus for a few months. I think it was maybe November time last year that I last did one. Um, but we are restarting with a lovely family member of mine, Mary Hawkyard, and she's going to introduce us to her artwork, her astrology practice, and also AstroDrama, which I'm intrigued about. Um, so, a quick introduction to me if you don't know me, if you found me on YouTube, I am an illustrator. I've worked on 4 best-selling oracle decks. I do a lot of intuitive art, and the clients that I meet, the reason why I started Magic Makers was I met so many interesting clients who had so many different sort of healing modalities and gifts that I was amazed to discover, and I felt like it would be lovely to share that with the world because you don't necessarily discover this stuff, without stumbling upon it. So to be able to share these different things like breath work, astrology, channeling, all that kind of stuff feels like a really special thing to do. So, Mary, introduce yourself.
Yes, Jen said, my name is Mary. I am an artist and an astrologer. Um, in terms of the artwork that I do, it's mostly, well, it is pretty much exclusively animal artwork. I have had various people over the years try and drag me out of that and into other things, but with limited success. I will admit. I will admit. Um, Mostly kind of intuitive, colourful, whimsical, fantasy inspired, spiritual animal artwork. I do a lot of animal portraiture work and a lot of sort of spirit animal portraiture work as well, which I'm trying to move more into that. But I think there's still quite a calling for the pet portraiture work and things like that because obviously a lot of people do, very kind of photorealistic pet portraiture work. There aren't so many of us doing the more kind of sort of colourful, imaginative
Yeah, well, I
style of
mean,
work. So
I don't know whether you've
it's
got any of your work there, Danny, but if you haven't, see, I've done it already.
it's all right.
Mary, if you haven't seen Mary's work,
You've
um,
known me a long time. You're forgiven.
uh, you you're absolutely right. Your work is not like typical animal portrait artwork. And if anything, I would say you are kind of tapping into the spirit of that animal. And most people who have animals, certainly myself, I consider my animals like familiars at the end of the day with a
Yeah.
very special and deep bond. And I think you must tap into that. There's more going on there than just photographic representation of the animal. So it's really lovely, lovely to see that. Do you have a few there?
I actually, in my desk, I have a couple of things hiding away here. I don't have any of the animal portraiture stuff because obviously that will get sent off to new homes. But that's actually my latest piece, which is waiting for a frame. So it's sat in my desk.
So Mary
So
works in pencil crayon
yeah,
and
I don't know how
glittery,
well you can see it on the screen.
sparkly
Shiny.
watercolors, right? So
Yeah,
unlike myself, who primarily does digital work nowadays,
I
I'm
wouldn't even know where to start with that.
when I look at your work though, as an artist, I go, oh my gosh, that's a lot of work. Every hair stroke is there multiple times over in pencil crayon. My wrist would be just turned into dust if I did that kind of work.
Yeah, I don't know. It's one of those things that I've never there's one that's entirely color pencil that hasn't been framed either, so it's still just sat in my desk. It's one of my precious stone series. That was opal.
So
Um
you've been drawing your whole life?
yeah, yeah, it's one of those things because I don't, people say kind of like, "Oh, tell me about your kind of your art journey." And I'm like, I don't really know where to like there isn't like there wasn't a moment where it began. I mean, I don't ever remember sort of learning to do it or deciding to do it. I don't remember there being a time where I didn't do it.
Mm.
Some I have knocking around somewhere, and I was going to see if I could. It's just like curiosity. I was going to see if I could find it, but I think it might be still in the wardrobe at mum and dad's house. This little notebook that's about that big, little spiral bound notebook that I used to draw pictures on one side of the notebook and then write a story on the other side. And that's the first notebook I remember having, and it's still around somewhere. I've seen it somewhere. I just don't know where it is, but it's definitely still alive. But it's just one of those things that I don't. There was no kind of pivotal moment where I decided I want to do artwork. It's just something that I imagine it was the same for you as well. Like it's just something that you've
Yeah. Yeah.
always
I
done.
mean,
Um,
I do have a very, I mean, I don't generally have a lot of memories of childhood that I can associate with certain periods of time, but I do definitely remember feeling like I don't want to go to school. I just want to draw pictures all day,
yeah.
you know.
Well, I don't know about you, but I used to draw pictures at school.
Yeah, that
I
too.
used to have my textbook over the top of my workbook so that I could lift it up slightly and then draw pictures in my workbook underneath
Yeah,
it.
absolutely. And I don't know whether I've ever asked you this, but I'm going to assume that you probably started obsessively drawing horses at a very early age. Is that right? Yeah. Which,
How
if
did you know?
anyone doesn't
What gave it
know,
away?
if anyone doesn't know, horses are like the ultimately difficult thing to paint or draw. So it's kind of like a baptism by fire, I think, when it comes to artwork. Do you find the same?
Yeah, it does make me chuckle when people are like, "Oh my God, horses are so hard to draw," and I'm like, they're my easiest thing to draw, but that's because I've been around them since again like that they've just always been there. My mum always had horses, and I grew up around them, and and I still remember kind of I was thinking because I knew we were doing this, I was thinking back over all the stuff that I used to do and kind of how it unfolded. And I remember kind of, I used to go to the farm with mum, and she'd go to do the horses, like we go to the livery yard, and I'd just be kind of left to my own devices to kind of potter about. And I'm sure I spent half the time pretending I was a horse and running around outside, and the other half kind of watching people walking around with them or riding them, and just kind of like making little mental notes about, how does the stifle kind of, what's the shape like, and kind of how does the belly taper, and all the muscles on the shoulder just there. And I remember like each time I would go, there'd be something that I'd try and take home. And if I look back over old drawings, you can see kind of moments where sort of the shape of a saddle suddenly clicked in your head, and or the set of the ears, and the set of the cheek, and little things that you just kind of added in sort of one by one just through sort of paying conscious attention, really.
Yeah, I do.
Um,
I'm very aware of that as an artist, like that constant, and it's the one thing that I get really frustrated about with the AI art thing is that the thing that's largely unseen within artists is that cataloging of life and going,
mm,
oh, how does light come through a leaf, and then figuring it out. And then when you do it, when you actually make it work within an artwork, you have a moment of like, oh, I've leveled up, and it's
that
amazing.
epiphany.
But like no one's around to appreciate it generally. And it's that kind of that journey of the artist that I think is getting lost at the moment. But
I
anyway,
agree. Yeah, I mean that's obviously a tangent that we could spend another whole hour probably griping about, but
yes.
there is definitely a part of me that feels very indignant about the fact that people are now out there able to just do this without any, you know, work, shall we say. But
Literally.
I'm not going to get onto that high horse. I'm not intended. So we'll be here all night just talking about that.
Well, so let's segue then into your kind of spiritual journey um, and or belief system and how that set you on a course to astrology, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, because as you probably guessed by this point, the art very much was what came first. It was art and animals that were kind of, my first sort of two loves, if you like. Um, and it wasn't until, I mean, I was always one of those, I was one of those kids that was, you know, in the garden making potions out of mud and twigs, and,
Yeah.
you know, pretending all sorts of fantastical, wonderful adventure stories, and I had a very vivid imagination. And I think even as a kid when I was drawing, I've never been one of those people that's, I very much struggle to kind of, when people say kind of like, oh, I can't think of anything to draw. Like I don't have that, I've never had that kind of artist's block. I mean, yes, I've sat down to draw something and then it hasn't gone the way that I wanted it to, sure. But I've never been short of images that kind of come to me, and I've never been one for reference pictures. It's all just stuff that's kind of come to me and come through me. And I think, at a young age, I didn't really understand. Obviously, you don't really have a concept of that, as a child from a spiritual perspective. Um, but I did sort of struggle, I think, with art at school a bit because I couldn't fit into the frameworks that they wanted me to um to conform to, because there was something else that was already there taking up space, and I just didn't have the words to be able to explain that at the time.
Yeah.
But I was always very resistant to, oh, we need to study, you need to do studies of three different artists' work and then create something from those three works. And I was like, but why? I don't need to do that. Like, I have so many other ideas and so many things that I want to do. And I think that's why I never did very well, because something else was already in there jostling for position and wanting center stage, and I was being asked to to conform to the academic curriculum basically. But it wasn't until much much later that I would kind of really acquire a language for that. And actually it was it's quite a long story really. I'll try and make it as concise as possible. But I had a very scientific background. The school I went to was very scientifically orientated. And actually, when I went to university and I did my BSc, that was in equine science. So I spent a good few years where the only artistic work I really did was anatomical drawings.
Yeah.
And then a few years later, I'd kind of spent a few years working. I'd worked with rescue dogs. I'd worked on stable yards, riding schools, ended up in the veterinary industry. And then through really kind of very loosely, it was through a very difficult long-term relationship that I was in. I got to a point in my life where I needed something that nobody else could take away from me, if that makes sense.
Mm. Yeah.
And completely by accident, I'd actually taken myself off to because back then I was living in Bedfordshire, so not that far from Milton Keynes, and that was just one day I took myself off to Milton Keynes shopping centre and I went to Waterstones. And I don't even know what I was looking for really. I don't know whether I just gone to blow all my money on books, or whether there was something specific I was looking for, but I felt like I was looking for something, and I had ended up in kind of the sort of, they have like that little corner that's kind of like sort of mostly sort of spiritual and self-help books and stuff like that. And I was looking for something. I think it was really more focused around kind of the paranormal and things like that. And I found this book called Walking the Ancient Greenway, The Path of Druidry by Penny Billington, and which I still have. It's on one of the bookshelves behind me. And I remember reading the back of it and just feeling like I'd come home.
Wow.
There was just this moment of kind of recognition of suddenly realizing that there were other people in the world who thought like I did.
Yeah.
This whole idea of kind of the animals and the land being sacred. Even despite sort of my scientific background, that had never left me. And I still have very, very visceral memories of being about 11 years old and in chemistry class, and my tutor emphatically telling us that if you can't prove something with science, it's not
Doesn't exist.
real, and all of
Yeah.
the hairs standing up on the back of my neck. Again, didn't understand why at that age. But having a very physical reaction to it, a very unpleasant reaction to it, where I really didn't like it. I couldn't have told you why I didn't like it, but something just did not sit right with me. So even through the academy's best efforts, it all still hung on. And as I said, I'd always felt very strongly that the nature connection with animals, trees, if someone said to me, well, are you religious? Well, to me, nature was God at that point
Yeah. Yeah.
in my life. And yeah, reading the back of this book, I was like, wow, I'm not the only one. There are other people out there, and there's actually a pathway for this. There's actually a community of people, with a name. There's
Yeah.
actually a group of people that think the same way I do. And the funny thing is, I didn't buy it at the time because I thought, I hesitate to say this in front of mum, but my first reaction was, what's dad going to think if I turn up at home with a book on druidry? And I was just like, I could just imagine his face if I walk in with this great big green book all about druidry. What on earth are you doing? I didn't buy it. I didn't take it home. And as soon as I got home, I regretted it.
Yeah.
And I think I ended up going, I either went back to get it or I possibly ordered it online. I can't remember now, but I ended up with it one way or another.
Yeah.
Um, it's one of those things that after that kind of little flame had been kindled, I started looking it up online. I found OBOD, the Order of Bards, Ovates, and Druids, and various other groups, and I started reading and learning and became fascinated with the Celtic mythology and the old stories
Well, it's
and
it's returning back
different
to
ways of being in the world.
yeah, it's returning back to
Yeah,
our culture, our Celtic culture here in the
yeah.
UK that we've been largely unplugged from, and disconnected from because they didn't really have a written
No, no, no,
record, I
nothing in the
suppose.
ancient Druid tradition was written down.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
was all word of mouth.
Hmm.
So, a lot of what is practiced today is, it's pieced together from, kind of the snippets that we have from the classical authors. And, so some of it you have to take with a pinch of salt because some of them had an agenda,
Yes.
the Romans and in particular. Um, but, it's lived on through various revivals, especially in the last sort of few hundred years. It's slowly sort of made its way back, and I think it's still becoming more and more popular today. The same with a lot of spiritual practices. I think reading tarot, I think astrology, a lot of things seem to be calling people back to them today. Um,
So you took a course,
yeah,
didn't you? Did you study it as well? Yeah.
yeah, I did. It was kind of once I'd really gotten into that, and I'd spent maybe a year or so kind of just doing my own self study. I knew I wanted to go back into education. Because obviously I'd done my BSc in equine science, and I knew that I wanted to go back into um, the academy somehow. But I was very much kind of a mind that I didn't want to continue doing what I'd been doing. I didn't want to go back down that scientific pathway. And I kind of, I considered various different things. I was looking at, do I go back and I do something in the arts? Do I look at, sort of the other things that I really enjoy, so creative writing? Um, obviously fascinated with psychology and the human condition, but I didn't really have the science background for that. And I didn't want to go back and kind of start all over again, if you know
Mhm.
what I mean. I wanted to feel like I was moving on and doing something, taking a next step. Um, and I think I'd gotten completely frustrated. I'd been sort of looking on Google and trying to find ideas and find something that would be suitable that I would be sort of qualified to do, if you like. Um, and I got incredibly frustrated. And I think in just a fit of frustration, I think I just typed something along the lines of degrees in folklore
Okay.
into Google,
Yeah.
just not expecting it to come up with anything at all,
Yeah.
really. Um, and the first thing that came up was an MA at Canterbury called Myth, Cosmology, and the Sacred. And I
Amazing.
was like, what's this? So I clicked on it and I read the page and I was like, that's it. That's what I want to do. And because of the nature of the course, it was such that as long as you had, a strong background that meant that you were capable of doing the course, you didn't need to have a relevant sort of, first degree. It had a lot of mature students on it who'd never even done a bachelor's at all.
Yeah, yeah.
It was really more about kind of the kind of person you were and what you were able to bring to it rather than your previous academic achievements.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so yeah, I then I went off and started that in, I think it was October of 2018, I think it was.
So is that how you discovered astrology? I'm sure I mean, we're all aware of the bloody astrology papers and newspapers, right? But is that how you sort of, I suppose, drop deeper into a practice with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, astrology at that point in my life wasn't even on my radar. I was already running Waterhorse Artistry. I mean, it was really more of a hobby venture at that point. It was a kind of small sort of side business, a bit of a side hustle, but it wasn't, a main career or an option really to be a main career at that point. But that work was already there and had become obviously increasingly sort of intuitive and more sort of magically minded as my own personal journey had unfolded. But yeah, and I'd sort of become, through sort of following the Druid tradition and meeting people and connecting with friends who also followed, various pagan paths, and we'd all kind of known each other a long time, and then suddenly found out later on that we'd all been doing this sort of stuff on the QT, and and sort of through them became very connected with like the local pagan community and was reading the tarot the name and the degree course was Myth, Cosmology and the Sacred, and it was at Canterbury Christ Church University, but it doesn't actually exist anymore, unfortunately. They dropped the course a few years ago, but the team that ran that is still running courses, and I believe they're doing it as a diploma now, and it's just called the Centre for Myth, Cosmology and the Sacred. So if you Google that, you'll find them.
Oh, that's good that they
Um,
still exist.
yeah, they're still there, but unfortunately, the proper academy didn't want them anymore because they didn't consider us to be serious academics,
Oh
unfortunately.
God.
But that's another story. Um, but yeah, so I was, I had I was reading the tarot occasionally. I would read for people, and I would get paid for the occasional events here and there. But as I said, astrology wasn't even, you know, it hadn't even really occurred to me.
Mhm.
Wasn't something I was particularly interested in. Not because I actively wasn't interested in it. It just never, not really crossed my path at all. And it was one afternoon on the MA actually that we had a workshop in AstroDrama, which actually is something that's now very very dear to my heart, and is really what I want to do, the bulk of my own work in. Um, and yeah, we essentially had this workshop where I think the simplest way of describing it really, because we haven't sort of started talking about the astrodrama at this point, but I had no background in astrology at all, and with astrodrama, the way that this workshop was conducted, you didn't need a background in astrology to be able to take part in it,
Mhm.
and it's kind of like an embodied approach, where you engage intuitively with the archetypes. And yeah, in brief, there were so many extraordinary experiences that happened during this afternoon that I just came away from it going, there's something really weird going on here, and I have to know what it is.
Logic
um,
brain is not working.
it was one of those things where, like through this whole kind of the process of doing this MA, because this was at sort of towards the end of the first year of the MA. So, I was already trying to get away from that kind of skeptical brain that was just like, there was the part of me that was like, I know that there is something here, and I know that there is more to life than meets the eye. And, you know, obviously even from just working with, cards and, animal spirit guides and things like that, just your own personal experience. But there was still that little horrible skeptical voice in the back of my head that just went, yeah, but what if you're just a bit nuts or a bit, wishful thinking? I just couldn't let go of that, that skepticism and that, but really, are you sure? And but it was one of those afternoons where so many extraordinary things happened that where you just kind of sat back and you just went, I can't explain that.
Yeah.
I can't just sit there and say that everything that happened today was coincidence.
Well, I think when we were discussing this the other day, I think what was really interesting for me was hearing that because I had thought, oh, so AstroDrama, you would pick, I don't know, your star sign or something, and then you'd act it out. But you said that in that instance, you just picked a random card and you had no idea it had any association with any of the planets or anything like that.
No, and I think that's what was so extraordinary about it because the way that I've been that I kind of personally practice astrodrama, the way that I will run my own retreats, and the way that I have worked with my own teacher and mentor, and the way that he runs his workshops. You know what you are. You don't get to choose it, but you know what you are, and it's a much more kind of engaged process. Whereas this particular session, although he was actually there for it, he wasn't the one leading it, because that's how I met him. He was doing his PhD with us on the course whilst we were doing the MA. And his name is John Wadsworth. He runs the Kairos School of Astrology. Extraordinary teacher. Highly recommend any of his courses to anyone who's interested in anything astrological. So yeah, he was there, but he wasn't taking part and he wasn't facilitating this particular session. This was being facilitated by somebody else who was also someone who had kind of done the MA and helped out, kind of sort of was still, I think, still studying at the time, I think, but was also kind of helping out with some of the sort of lectures and tutoring and stuff like that as well. A guy called Samal, and the way that he did it was very, very different. So what he did was he took 7 pieces of paper and he put them face down on the floor in the room. So we put all the chairs to the edge and he put these 7 pieces of paper face down on the floor. And he'd already said, if you want to take part, get up, start walking around the room, feel the energy, feel, what do you feel drawn to in terms of which piece of paper on the floor do you feel drawn to? And normally, because we'd already been kind of sort of pre-warned, this was going to be one of those things, you're standing up in front of people, you're going to be asked questions, and for me, that was all. I'm going to be put on the spot. I don't do that. I don't like the sound of having to get up in front of people and be put on the spot, and especially with something I know nothing about.
Mm.
It's one thing if I know what I'm talking about, but all of my kind of very, very human embarrassments kind of would normally come to the surface and stop me from doing something like that. And on that day, there was just something in me that went, no, you have to do this.
Yeah.
And I just, at the last minute, I decided to get up and take part. And it just by coincidence, just by chance, just by divine intervention, there ended up being the perfect number of us for the number of pieces of paper that he put on the floor. But all he'd put on these pieces of paper, so we walked around the room, felt the energy of the room, decided, which piece we feel drawn to. And again, as these things often do work out this way, nobody went to the same piece of
Yeah.
paper. Everybody just sort of ended up in the right place, I guess. And all that was on these pieces of paper was a letter. So he had a list of which letter he corresponded to which planet.
Hmm.
But all we knew was that we were planet A or B or D or D or whatever.
Right.
But he had a list saying which one of us was which, and I think he'd done the sun out to Saturn. We didn't include the outer planets that day. But so we didn't know what we were.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that Samal conducted the session was that he would start by saying, okay, planet D, how are you feeling? So you just had to feel into whatever was coming through
Mm.
and, say what came to you.
Yeah.
Do you want to move around the room? Do you want to speak to anyone? Do you want to be close to anyone else? Or do you want to be far away from anyone else?
Hmm.
Um,
And in not knowing
and
at this point you still don't know your planet, so
no,
you're
not a
completely
clue.
winging it. And I suppose what's really interesting that I didn't think of last time we spoke is that like um I find when I'm doing intuitive work and especially channeling a message for someone or something, it helps to not have an agenda. If I'm asking a question like, why is this happening to me? It's the worst thing ever. it's really difficult. You struggle to get out of the way because you have an agenda. You have like a belief system that you're going to start almost arguing with the energy. Um, but because you didn't know what you were just acting, literally channeling that energy, right? And you couldn't judge it because you didn't know what you were. You weren't like, oh, well, I know I'm um, Pluto or Saturn or whatever, so I know that Saturn is this. It was just like, no, you don't know what you are, so you're just doing it. And I think that's amazing.
Yeah. And I think that's what kind of got me at the end of it, because even though the work that I do with John, where we do know what we are, and in some ways you'd almost expect that to be unhelpful, but actually the way that um the way that he facilitates his groups, they are incredibly powerful sessions,
Mhm.
and people we seem to end up with, I think the people that are drawn to this kind of work tend to be very open anyway for the most part, and most of them are able to get out of their own way
Yeah.
and allow the archetype to come through. um but I think for me in that first session, because I'd never done anything like this before, I think that was what kind of hit me about it, because there were no excuses. There was no way I could say, oh well, she knew that she was playing Saturn or the Sun, or he knew that he was Mars, so of course you're gonna act in a certain way.
So,
But
so
as
to
it turned out at the end of it, there was one lady who the lady who was playing the Sun was, easily probably one of the sort of loudest, most flamboyant people in the room. She'd said at one point she wanted to stand in the middle of the room, and at the time I thought, well, just of course you do. That's just you anyway. Like, you're just so, just one of these radiant people that just kind of wants to be in the middle and involved all the time. And that's absolutely not a criticism of that energy at all. It's just who she was.
Mm,
But at the time when we were in the moment, I was thinking, well, of course you want to be in the middle of the room because that's just you. And then at the end, it turned out that she was the Sun, and it couldn't have been more perfect for
yeah.
her. My one of my friends, who's very sadly is no longer with us, she was a primary school teacher, and she ended up being Mercury.
Mm.
I was the youngest woman in the room, and I was wearing green that day, and I ended up with Venus. The only guy who took part ended up being Mars.
That's
And I still remember a
uncanny.
friend of mine who was Saturn, complaining that she was cold.
On the
And
edge.
it's quite, yeah. Saturn was the furthest planet from the sun back when, before we had telescopes and we could see beyond.
Yeah. Yeah.
Saturn is why Saturn's the boundary keeper, because he was the boundary of the known universe.
Yeah. Yeah.
Until we
So
suddenly discovered Uranus,
so
Neptune.
basically these sort of things were coming through in the individuals who had no idea what they were doing, but it was accurate to the way these planets are said to operate, I suppose, through astrology. Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, I honestly, I don't remember all the little nuances of kind of the different things we said and did, apart from one of my friends, as I said, who was Saturn saying that she was cold. That one stuck with me. But if we'd have picked the planets ourselves, we couldn't have
Yeah.
chosen better in terms of kind of sort of casting ourselves, if you like. So
So
even that itself was extraordinary. But there were just so many little things where you just kind of go, this is just, it's just a little bit weird. It's just freaking me out a little bit. This is just a little bit strange. And I think I wouldn't have necessarily been hit as hard by that if we'd have known what we were.
yeah,
Because
yeah,
that little skeptical voice is always going to be like, oh yeah, but
yeah,
you did know.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But you didn't. So,
um
so what does someone get out of doing astrodrama? Why would they embark on doing that?
I think the thing with astrology generally, which if you've ever kind of studied it to any degree, or had a reading of any kind. I mean, obviously, I think we did a reading at one point, didn't we?
Hmm.
Um, it can be very heady in terms of kind of, it can be very technical. There's a lot of a lot of symbolism, a lot of what does this planet mean, what does that sign mean, what does this planet then mean when it's the delineations, the kind of the mental processes of delineating what a planet means in a certain sign. in aspect perhaps to another planet or in a certain house. Um, and we can get very caught up in trying to understand the symbolism, but we're very limited in that sense by the boundaries of language,
Yeah.
and what we can say and what we can express to another person in a way that they will understand. Whereas with astrodrama or any kind of embodied astrology, actually, whether that's, sort of channeling an archetype artistically, writing about it, things like transference dialogues, which is, when you kind of make space for something and essentially engage in a communication, like a conversation with the archetype. Um, whether it's poetry, song, any of these kind of creative ways of actually engaging with the archetypes allows us to know it in a different way. And I have learned so much about, you know, not even, just planets in my own chart, but just about different, astrological placements generally, and sort of relationships between different planets through embodying them in an astrodrama setting that never would have occurred to me, if I hadn't have actually kind of almost felt how that planet moves and how that planet feels. So it really gives us a more living, breathing way of knowing the archetypes.
Well, and it's a fantastic way to learn, isn't it? Like to have that sank into your brain, um, physically learning something versus just headspace mentally learning by rote. That's certainly been my experience learning tarot, is that when I do, I've been doing more readings on myself than anything else. And it's in experiencing the cards and the archetypes in your own readings that you go, oh, I get that, you know?
Yeah,
And so I get it mentally by what's being said in the meaning book, but I get it because I've experienced it in my
yeah.
life, you know?
Exactly. And I think that's one of the things that, kind of like older kind of experienced astrologers will obviously have to their advantage, is that, when they've lived through many transits, you get a feel for kind of how something feels. Oh, each time I have a Saturn return, or each time, Mars is squaring my sun, there's this certain energy that feels a certain way, and you feel it in your body and in your soul, and you recognize it.
Mm,
And that's a different way of knowing and of relating to those energies than just simply understanding that Mars, transiting Mars square my natal sun means this,
yeah.
which is quite abstract, really.
Well, and it's the same as tapping into any, I suppose, earthly energy, um, in the sense of bringing a level of presence into your life. Like for me, for example, this year I'm sort of focusing on the moon and the moon cycles, and at its most basic level, can definitely say that during the time of the full moon, it's like having floodlights on in my brain, and I don't sleep as much, and I start doing massive projects at like bedtime, you know. And that's just a very simple thing that by intentionally focusing on a modality, if you will, then and operating it with it in your life for a decent amount of time, you suddenly become aware of these alignments and things like that. I imagine it's much the same with astrology.
Absolutely. And I think, as I said, like, it possibly doesn't actually come across from explaining that, that particular that one workshop, because that was a very kind of abstract session in a lot of ways. We weren't actually looking at anyone's chart. We were literally just working with the planets. They weren't in a sign. They were just planetary energies on their own, and it was just seeing what came through, and kind of what message it had for sort of each of us, the planet that we were working with,
Hmm.
even though we didn't know we were working with them until afterwards. um Whereas when when I do the work that we do with the Kairos School of Astrology, with John's school, you know, it's often a retreat setting, so it's sort of 4 or 5 days. It's a group of about 12 people, and we spend the week basically working through each other's charts one by one. So you essentially are having almost a live chart reading in a sense, except that the other people in the room are embodying the planets in your chart.
Yeah.
Um, and it's kind of it's I hesitate to use the word acting because I don't believe that that's what's happening in that session. From the amount of work I've done with it, I mean, I've done a lot of this work at a personal level,
Mm.
as opposed to a professional level. Um, and I really do believe that, partly because I think of the success of these sessions, the way that even the people that are sat there going, "Oh, I'm really not sure I can do this," or "I don't, I've come here because I'm interested, but I don't know anything about astrology." You don't need to, because actually, the more you know, the more you can get in your own way.
Yeah.
We'll spend a bit of time at the beginning, just making sure everybody's, you know, we talk about the person's intention, what they'd like to get out of it. We have a little, very brief look at the chart. We don't get too tied up in technicalities. And then, they pass around a hat with all the planets in, let the gods choose which one of us is going to be who. And, then we have masks, we have costume, and it's a lot of it's a lot of fun. It's you could call it kind of therapeutic play, really.
Yeah.
Um, but there is something really extraordinary about seeing other people who 9 times out of 10 you don't know that well. Some of them you've never met before. I mean, I only know most of them these days because I've done this so many times. But for a lot of people, they come to this completely blind. They don't know anyone. Um, don't know anything meaningful about your life really beyond what you might have told them over dinner or at
Mm. Mm.
lunchtime. And there's something incredibly profound about seeing other people channeling the planets in your chart, seeing the conversations that unfold, the things that happen, and just little things that people say where you just think, how did they know that? And I've done it. I actually find that I prefer working in somebody else's chart than watching my own being done, because I find I actually get more out. I get taught more
Yes.
from being in somebody else's chart, because again, you're learning the archetypes, you're experiencing them in different ways. And like, for sort of one example, I remember being Mercury and Capricorn in somebody's chart, and you think kind of Mercury and Capricorn is going to be sort of very organized, maybe a little bit authoritarian, a little bit bossy, kind of, it's going to have all of its ducks in a row. It's the messenger. It's so it's probably going to be maybe quite in charge, because Capricorn likes to have all the structures and the foundations in place, and there's a lot of deep wisdom there. It's quite a mature Mercury. But being Mercury in this person's chart, and having and the way that the other planetary energies were manifesting, this incredible sense of overwhelm and exhaustion, and just feeling almost like this overworked, underpaid secretary that was desperately trying to keep everything together, and it all keeps falling apart. And I just got to the point. I remember I ended up lying down on the floor and just being like, I just can't. And none of that was planned beforehand. I didn't. None of this was. None of it's pre-written. It just
Yeah.
unfolds the way it unfolds. But it gave me a completely different perspective
Yeah.
on Mercury and Capricorn.
Yeah.
And a different understanding of how the energies of Mercury and the energies of Capricorn can manifest in my own life.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
um so it really is a profound learning tool. But as I said, there is something very, very bizarre about watching your own chart being acted out. As I said, I don't like to use the word acting because I
No,
think it
no.
does it disservice.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's very it's very unsettling the first time you have it done, because you do just, it is kind of like watching the voices in your head kind of discussing or arguing amongst themselves, and yet you're watching it rather than actually being the facilitator of it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's very uncanny, but
Yeah. Yeah.
it's, yeah,
Sort of have
it's
an out of body
incredibly
experience.
enlightening. Yeah.
So what could you
Absolutely.
like, can you share an idea of what would you go to one of these for? Like, what is an intention someone might set that, or something they might want help with, as an example?
I think, the limits for that are fairly limitless, really. Some people come because, some of us, I do it because I love the work, I love the depth of the work, and I just want to experience it and be a part of it as much as possible, and learn as much as possible.
Hmm.
But in the past, some people have come because perhaps they've lost a partner and they're trying to find their way in life again.
Mm-hmm.
Some people have come because they're interested in astrology. Perhaps they're doing something else like your plant medicine or homeopathy or channeling or something like that, and they're trying to find different ways into a new discipline.
Yeah.
There really is, people come from all sorts of different backgrounds. Um, some people have come, so the very first time I did one of these retreats properly, I knew nothing about astrology, and I just went because I wanted to know more and because I'd found the first workshop that I'd done so, so profound.
Yeah.
For me early on, a lot of my intentions were around sort of finding confidence, and stepping into kind of one's own power, if you like, one's own sovereignty,
Yeah.
essentially kind of trying to unlock solar energy, really. Because for me, that's something I've always found very hard to access.
Right.
Um, I'm a Leo sun, but back, you know, sort of 5, 6, 7+ years ago, I never resonated with that archetype at all. I didn't know how to embody that, how to show up in front of people and be comfortable with it.
Mm.
You wouldn't have caught me doing something like this, even with the group, you
Yeah.
know, because I would have frozen up.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was almost like I needed something to give me a permission slip, and it was AstroDrama that did that.
Wow.
Um, it was actually the second retreat I did. So by this point, I was already studying, I already knew more about astrology, and so we had a very strong Leo energy. There were a lot of Leos in this particular retreat. I think there were about four of us that were all Leo suns, and then a couple of others that also had Leo placements. And I have to say, I think we were quite badly behaved on a few occasions because we just got carried away in the way that Leos sometimes do with their own wonderfulness. But I think being surrounded by all of these people with such kind of strong Leonine energy, really kind of started to shift something in me. And then in one of their charts, I ended up getting Jupiter in Gemini. And obviously, Jupiter, planet of growth, expansion, good fortune, broadening perspectives. And then in Gemini, which is quite kind of precise, quite witty, the information gatherer, very curious. And I was thinking, how on earth am I going to meld these two energies? I was starting to get a little bit in my head and thinking, Jupiter is this kind of big, expansive, broad thinking, um, takes up space. And then, in Gemini, in Mercury's sign, there's this quickness, there's this lightness, there's this quirkiness and this freeness. And I was like, okay, there's a bit of something there, but I'm not quite sure whether I can pull this off. This feels maybe a little bit beyond me. And just throughout and I think we were maybe a good halfway through the session when I suddenly realized that I was saying stuff and people were howling, people were laughing,
Yeah.
and I was like, I have never been the person in a room before that can get up in front of people and make them laugh.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've never been the comedian. I've never been, the clown. And all of a sudden, without me even realizing it, this energy had kind of come through me, and there I was, kind of taking up space in a very Jupiterian, a very Gemini Jupiterian way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Taking up space, being loud, making jokes, being a bit weird, being a bit quirky,
Yeah.
being a little bit cheeky. and people in a way that I would have never dreamed of doing, because I
Mm.
would have just thought, oh God, that's so annoying. I don't want to annoy everybody. But it was like it was like that planet. It was like Jupiter had just given me this permission slip to say it's okay to take up space.
Yeah.
It's okay to go out there and be a bit loud and a bit annoying and a bit cheeky and
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because we don't get that permission slip very often in life unless we're actors. Um, we don't play, I think there's obviously improv classes, which could be a similar energy, I suppose, because you're really rolling with it, whatever is happening, right? But yeah, we don't, as adults, generally get permission to be something completely not yourself, not in control necessarily and unjudged and all that kind of stuff. So it's lovely that you
yeah.
can do that and do it for someone and presumably you could see how it's helping them. Do you have like a deconstruction session afterwards where you talk about
Yeah.
it? Yeah.
Yeah, afterwards, the person whose chart it was will kind of start by just saying kind of what they felt and what they experienced whilst, we were working on their chart, and the things that jumped out at them, the things that resonated. And, it's again, it's one of those things where I've become increasingly convinced that, something else moves through us when we do that. Because quite often, they'll say, oh, that thing you said about X, Y, and Z. And so I can't believe you said that, because that so reminded me of my mother, or that so reminded me of this thing that happened when I was a child, or this experience that I had a week ago.
Mm.
That it resonates with them on a level that we never would have known had it not come up. And 9 times out of 10, you can't remember that you said it or that you did it.
Yeah. I was gonna say,
I guess
I
it's a
bet
bit
you
like
don't
channeling.
remember. Yeah.
Yeah, and you kind of go, "Did I say that? That was quite good." I don't remember saying it, but and it is. It's very much like well, it is. I think I personally believe that it is a channeling experience.
Gotcha. Yeah, yeah.
We are inviting in the gods. We are opening the door, and it's a bit of a throwback, really, to the ancient Greek way of
Yeah.
thinking about
Yeah.
astrology. We're not just talking about planetary archetypes and symbols, and we're not just putting it in a kind of Jungian psychological perspective. These are actual entities. We could even go so far as to say these are, we're working with beings, and the gods. It's not just about us and our own psyche. It's about something else that's moving through us.
Yeah.
Um, and I've felt that when I've put on the costumes and the mask and looked in the mirror, and all of a sudden had this very acute awareness that I'm not what's controlling me anymore.
Yeah. Really
You know,
powerful. And
it's
and the group element,
yeah,
I'm sure, just adds to that. Any practice that I've done, even breath work with people all over the world, disparately over Zoom, is more powerful as a group than it is as an individual.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think once you're kind of used to kind of falling into sort of different states of consciousness, and you're used to kind of kind of moving more fluidly between the different roles and working with the different energies, I think you can do more on your own.
Yeah.
But one of the things that is so profound, or that I find so sort of powerful about it, is seeing the interactions between the planets in a chart, because no planet in a chart is an isolated entity. A chart is a living ecosystem of energies and archetypes that are constantly being affected, not just by what's going on externally, by sort of transits and things like that, these progressions in the sky at the time, but also by each other. you
Mhm.
know it's why I said earlier, like, I'd never resonated with my Leo sun. It wasn't until I became an astrologer I realized that, for anyone who sort of has a sort of basic understanding of the archetypes, and the mythologies behind the planets, my sun is opposed by Saturn, squared by Pluto, and conjunct with Chiron. So no wonder it doesn't feel like a normal Leo sun, because it gets a pretty hard time of it.
Right.
You've got father time across across the chart going, remember the consequences of being seen and showing up and shining too brightly. Pluto there going, well, it's all a bit bright and airy fairy, and what about the shadow and you know the power and you know
Hmm.
all what about the dark? The sun's all well and good, but have you looked at this stuff in the shadows recently? And Chiron, the archetype of the wounded healer, um, making it an incredibly vulnerable place to be seen.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which was why for me that moment with the Jupiter and Gemini was so powerful, because I was like, I can do that,
Yeah.
and the world doesn't end,
You didn't
you
die.
know. And it was I think that was where a lot of my, you know for me, that was where kind of my own self-confidence started to suddenly grow, because I suddenly realized actually there was another way, and actually it was okay, and actually it was kind of fun.
Yeah.
But I would never have ever experienced that if I hadn't have had that moment as Jupiter and Gemini of being like, people are laughing because of me and stuff that
Mm.
I'm doing and stuff that I'm saying. And actually, this is kind of weird. This is kind of cool. I like this. Like,
Yeah.
you know,
It's
it's
opening up parts of your personality that do exist. They've just never been given room
yeah,
to exist, I suppose.
yeah, absolutely. As I said, the chart is a living ecosystem. My son now, whilst I will never be the person probably outside of that setting who can get up and do that stuff,
Hmm.
it's given me a world of confidence that I never had before.
Yeah. Yeah.
And even just that in itself is valuable, let alone, some of the more personal stuff that comes out of doing these charts for, people that are kind of really stuck at points in their lives, or, really struggling with something, or really lost with something.
Hmm.
Um, it's quite frequent for the person whose chart it is to shed a few tears, at
Yeah.
least, whilst they're experiencing their own chart being done, because it does shift something in you.
Yeah.
Um,
And
yeah,
presumably with a private, just a private reading that you do, like the one I had with you, you could also come with an issue or a
yeah,
thing to unpack. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, some people kind of will say otherwise, but I personally feel that I think it's the same with tarot, to be honest. I think it's the same with tarot readings, but more so perhaps with astrology. I think actually it's more helpful if you can come with an intention rather than saying, I just want a general overview, because with astrology especially, there's so much going on in a chart. There's that you can't possibly unpack all of it in, a standard reading is usually a 90-minute session. 9 times out of 10 it runs over, and I tend to allow it to do so, because quite often it's not appropriate to cut it off
Yeah.
midway through something important. um so they quite often end up being a bit longer, but they're intended to be 90-minute sessions, and you can't unpack the whole chart. I mean, I've been studying my own chart for years, and I'm still learning. There are still new things that come up,
Right.
but
Right.
again, that's the nature of the energies. They are constantly changing. They're changing in relation to what's happening in our lives. They're changing in relation to what we're doing with them, how we're engaging with them, and in relation to how, as I said, how the planets affect each other. um, it's not something that you can just, it's not like a book that you can just reach the end of. It's a
No,
never-ending process of learning and discovery, really.
absolutely.
um,
Well,
but
we are,
yeah, I think I was just going to say, yeah, I think it does help if you can come with an intention, because then at least we can, you can focus it on something that's going to be helpful for the client.
yeah.
Rather, I mean, sometimes, you just sort of, someone will say, oh, well, I was just kind of curious, because I do events where I do sort of short readings, where I sort of just off the cuff, sort of half an hour
Mhm.
session. Haven't seen the chart before, so I've not done any prep or any calculations or looked at anyone's transits or anything like that. And sometimes people say, oh, well, actually I was just kind of curious about my moon sign, or I was just kind of curious about this, and we'll start kind of just pulling at that little thread and seeing where it takes us. And sometimes they do actually end up in some very surprising places. But with a full reading, I think it is better to have a an intention, because then we can actually
Focus on it. Focus
focus
on
on
something.
something that's going to be helpful for somebody, especially for, a session that's as big as it is. And, I think it's important that people go away feeling like they've, gotten some answers that are actually helpful and relevant to them at the point in their life that they're at
Exactly.
the time.
Yeah, exactly. I now I'm like, oh, I should book another session with you with an intention.
We can definitely do that. Yeah, because didn't you do when I was still doing my astrology diploma? Because I did, after I did my MA, I went and did, straight off the back of that, I did 2 years astrology study, and I think you were one of my case studies, weren't you?
Oh, maybe,
I think you were.
maybe. I thought you were done that already, but yeah, because you're
I
already
don't
in
remember. I
North
don't honestly remember. I
Wales.
think you. I think you were one of my case studies.
Maybe, maybe. I know we, our me and my sister and my mum, I think, all submitted our uh info to you.
Yeah,
But I feel like it's separate, but I may have merged it in my head, or separated it. Uh,
yeah. I think we did. I don't remember which module it was for, but I'm sure that we did. That you were one of my case studies.
okay. I need to rewatch it. I really do, and go back into it. Because it's overwhelming when you look at the detailed astrological star chart. I have a huge respect for anyone who can unpack all of that. So we are a little over time. So if anyone wants to drop a question in the chat, please do. But otherwise, perhaps you can just share what you're offering at the moment for people if they want to get in touch with you, where they can find you, and potentially what the future holds.
Yeah, the best place to find me really at the moment is my shiny, sparkly new website, which is merryhawkyards.co.uk. All my artwork, all my astrological work is on there. Um, there is, I'm due to do quite a big shop update soon, so there will be more things being added to the online shop, and then I'll be sending out probably some cheeky little discount codes through my newsletter. So if that's something that is of interest, please do sign up to that. um, but with regards to the astrological work, I think that's really kind of, I try and split my time fairly evenly between the two. But I think kind of the newer developments are going to be coming with my astrological work, because I'm really wanting to look into kind of creative astrology sort of workshops and things like that. I'm currently trying to work out some ways that I can bring the AstroDrama, or the sort of the more embodied creative astrology into an online setting. So I think there are going to be some workshops kind of coming up within the next year or so, um, sort of along the lines of working with the planets kind of creatively through either artistic practice or
Mhm.
engaging with them in creative ways, whether it's writing. I'm going to try and keep it fairly open so that people can choose a modality they're comfortable with.
I love that.
But I think there might be a series of sessions kind of focused on the different planets. Um, that's something I might be doing with the Centre for Myth, Cosmology and the Sacred, who was the MA
Oh,
group.
fab.
So that's something that's hopefully on the horizon for potentially the some point within the next year. Otherwise, you can book consultations on my website. I have a booking calendar on there now. And there is also an option to book a free half-an-hour call with me if you want to pick my brain or have a chat with me and just see if we gel before committing to a full reading. Because I think with astrology, it's like any kind of divination, really. We can end up going into some pretty deep places, and it's important for clients to know that they're comfortable with me, that they it's something they want to engage with, and that I'm the right person to do that with them.
Yeah.
um so there's an option to book a free little session with me where you can pick my brains and ask any questions, and before committing to the full reading.
Yeah.
um and I am also probably possibly this weekend, actually. I was hoping to do it before this session and ran out of time this week. I am going to be adding an option for the short readings that I do at events, because I've actually found some of those to be very successful little sessions for people that, again, are curious. Um, but they sort of, they want a reading or they want a taster session, but they don't want perhaps to go for the full
Yeah.
consultation.
Yeah.
So I'm adding those to the website as well as a more affordable option, because I know a lot of people at the moment don't want to or can't commit to the financial output as well of a big
So
consultation.
potentially when the recording is up, probably by then that will be available. So
I should think so, yeah.
I can always link to it in the description and when I send it out, um, people can grab that. Um,
Yeah, I can make sure it's up by then. That's fine.
yeah.
It's not too much to do. It's just this week's run away a bit.
Me too. Oh, well, thank you so much,
But yeah,
Danny.
no, otherwise, yes.
This has been an absolute treat to delve more deeply into your work and your journey, and thank you for sharing about it. I'm excited for what the future holds for, your artwork and your astrology and astrodrama. And I am, fully committed to the vision of the retreat place where we get to do stuff together with art and
I
astrology and
know.
intuition somewhere in Wales.
We will
It's getting
definitely
closer.
we will definitely find somewhere for that. Actually, I have found a venue actually. I'll have to ping you over some deets and see what you think.
Yeah.
But yeah, retreats are definitely something that are on the horizon. For me, I would love to start running my own AstroDrama retreats, but at the moment there is a lot going on, and I think it would be slightly ambitious for me to attempt to also try and run a retreat at this point. So it's probably not going to be this year or the next sort of 12 months, but certainly once I've got some more online stuff. I'm also relaunching a blog. I'm going to be doing a lot of writing around sort of creative work with astrology.
Yeah.
So once all of this is in place and I've got some online courses and some smaller, more bite-sized offerings available online, I will be looking at retreats. So retreats will be a thing as well for the AstroDrama retreats. It's just that I'm trying not to bite off more than I can chew at this point in time.
Do you still run the Facebook group for creatives?
Yes, yeah, it hasn't been particularly active, but I'm going to be sort of figuring out what to do with that. But it is still there at the moment. It's called Re-Enchanted Creatives, and it's basically just directed towards kind of creatives of any discipline who sort of use their practice to connect with the unseen magic in the world, whether that's through sort of channeling artistically, or writing, or poetry, or photography, or anything really.
Mm.
But yeah, sort of for magically minded creative souls.
I love it.
So
Love it.
yeah, it is still there, and it will be being used again. But I have been taking a bit of time away from social media, so everything is kind of coming back online one piece at a time at the moment. So
Mm. I know what it's like. So yeah, best place to check out Mary is maryhawkyard.co.uk, and definitely sign up for her newsletter. That's always my advice. Just join the newsletter because with social media being what it is, with the algorithm, you're not always guaranteed to see what you're putting out there. So, but the newsletter you are guaranteed to see it. Um, and I don't know about you, Mary, but that's usually the first place that I share stuff, and then things come out after that. So definitely a high priority.
yeah. Yeah, absolutely. My newsletter is actually up and running again. I sent one out yesterday, which is the first one after the launch of the new website. So that was very exciting for me. I was very pleased with myself managing to get that out. So yes, that is probably the best place. Like you say, social media is not really a friend to small businesses these days. But if you are on Instagram and Facebook, I have pages for both my artwork and my astrological practice. So you can find me under Waterhorse Artistry on Instagram and Facebook, and also Pegasus Astrology.
Wonderful.
Um, they are separate, I'm afraid, on Facebook, but the website has everything in one place. So
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. Well, thank you so much. Thank you everyone for coming. The recording will be up shortly, within about a week, and I will put my thinking cap on as to who will be next, because as usual, I'm winging it and haven't asked anyone yet. But I'm sure I will think of someone. It's usually once a month that I do Magic Makers. So we're gonna call it quits now, and thank you for coming, guys.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome.